There are moments when someone takes over your mind so completely that it feels like you don't even have control anymore. You wake up thinking about them. You check your phone hoping for a message. You replay conversations. Because what you're experiencing isn't just attraction. It's not just love. And it's definitely not random. Something deeper is going on inside your brain, and once you understand it, the whole experience starts to make sense in a way that might actually surprise you. Let's start with something simple but uncomfortable. Your brain is not designed to make you emotionally peaceful. It's designed to keep you emotionally engaged. And one of the most powerful ways it does that is by attaching intense focus to things that feel uncertain, unpredictable, or emotionally rewarding. That combination is where obsession begins. When someone gives you attention inconsistently, when they're warm one day and distant the next, when you don't know exactly where you stand with them, your brain doesn't interpret that as confusion. It interprets it as importance. Because uncertainty triggers curiosity. And curiosity keeps you hooked. Think about it like this. If something is completely predictable, your brain gets bored. But if something is unpredictable, your brain stays alert. And alertness, over time, can turn into fixation. This is one of the reasons people don't obsess over people who are fully available and emotionally consistent. There's no mystery to solve. But when someone is inconsistent, your mind starts trying to solve them like a puzzle that never finishes. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Your brain rewards you not only for getting emotional connection, but also for chasing it. Dopamine, the same chemical involved in motivation and reward, spikes not when you get the thing you want, but when you anticipate it. So every time you think, maybe they'll text me today, or maybe they're starting to like me, your brain gives you a small hit of dopamine. Not because it happened, but because it might happen. That might becomes addictive. And over time, your brain learns something powerful. Thinking about this person feels rewarding. Even if the actual situation is painful or confusing, the anticipation itself becomes a loop. This is how obsession forms. Not from love alone, but from a cycle of anticipation, uncertainty, and emotional reward. But there's another layer that people rarely talk about. Sometimes you're not actually obsessed with the person. You're obsessed with what they represent. They might represent validation, or excitement, or escape from loneliness, or even a version of yourself that feels more confident, wanted, or alive. And when that happens, your mind is no longer just attached to a person. It's attached to a fantasy that your brain built around them. That's why you can know logically that someone is not good for you, or not even that interested, and still feel emotionally pulled toward them. Logic and emotional conditioning are operating in two different systems. One understands reality. The other is chasing emotional payoff. Now let's talk about something even deeper, attachment patterns. From a very young age, your brain learns what love feels like based on your environment. If love felt consistent, safe, and predictable, you tend to form secure attachment patterns. But if love felt inconsistent, unpredictable, or emotionally distant, your brain adapts. It learns to stay alert, to monitor, to scan for signs of attention or rejection. Because inconsistency used to mean survival on an emotional level. So later in life, when you meet someone who is emotionally unavailable or inconsistent, your brain recognizes the pattern and says, "This feels familiar." Familiar doesn't mean healthy. Familiar just means known. And your brain prefers the known over the unknown, even when the known causes emotional chaos. That's why obsession often doesn't feel like peace. It feels like tension. Like mental noise. Like constantly waiting for something to change. But there's a strange truth here that most people don't realize. The intensity you feel is not proof of deep love. It's often proof of emotional instability in the connection. Real love, the kind that is healthy and grounded, actually feels calmer over time. Not more chaotic. But obsession feels intense because your nervous system is activated. You're not relaxed. You're alert. Watching. Waiting. Interpreting every small signal. A delayed text message becomes meaningful. A short reply becomes a sign. A social media activity becomes evidence. Your brain starts building stories out of fragments because it's trying to reduce uncertainty. And here's the paradox. The more you try to figure them out, the more you stay emotionally attached. Because your brain confuses thinking with progress. Now let's go deeper into something very important: intermittent reinforcement. This is one of the strongest psychological mechanisms behind obsession. When rewards are given inconsistently, not predictably, the brain becomes far more engaged than when rewards are consistent. It's the same principle used in slot machines. You don't know when you're going to win. But the possibility keeps you playing. In emotional terms, if someone sometimes gives you attention, sometimes pulls away, sometimes is warm, sometimes distant, your brain stays locked in trying to predict the pattern. And the prediction becomes addictive. You're no longer just waiting for the person. You're waiting for the next emotional win. Even if those wins are small. Even if they don't lead anywhere meaningful. This is why letting go can feel so hard. It's not just emotional attachment. It's a conditioned reward loop in your nervous system. But there's still another piece. Your mind also tends to idealize what is not fully available. When you don't have full access to someone, your brain fills in the gaps with imagination. And imagination is always more perfect than reality. You don't see their full personality. You see fragments. And those fragments get enhanced by hope, desire, and projection. So what you end up obsessed with is not the real person in full detail, but an edited version of them that exists in your mind. And the more time you spend thinking about them, the more real that version becomes. This is why distance often intensifies obsession. Not because love is growing, but because imagination is expanding. Social media makes this even worse. 100 years ago, if someone disappeared from your life, eventually your brain had space to detach. But today, someone can leave emotionally while remaining digitally present every single day. You see their photos, their stories, their likes, their online activity. Small details that your brain interprets as emotional clues. And without realizing it, you start monitoring them. You tell yourself you're just checking, but what you're really doing is feeding the obsession loop. Because every time you see new information about them, your brain reactivates the emotional pattern associated with them. Even worse, social media creates the illusion of proximity without actual connection. You feel emotionally connected to someone who may not even be thinking about you at all. And your imagination fills the silence with stories. Who are they with? Why did they post that? Was that quote directed at me? Why did they watch my story but not message me? Your brain hates incomplete information. So it creates narratives to close the gap. And those narratives often have very little to do with reality. Another reason obsession becomes so intense is because rejection affects the brain more deeply than most people realize. Studies on emotional rejection show that the brain can respond to social rejection similarly to physical pain. That's why heartbreak doesn't just feel emotional. Sometimes it feels physical. Tight chest. Loss of appetite. Anxiety. Restlessness. Trouble sleeping. Your nervous system interprets emotional disconnection as a threat. And strangely, rejection can sometimes increase obsession instead of reducing it. Why? Because your brain becomes desperate to restore emotional certainty. If someone rejects you clearly and permanently, healing can eventually begin. But if the rejection is unclear, mixed with hope, confusion, or occasional affection, your brain stays trapped between possibility and loss. That middle zone is psychologically exhausting. And many people stay there for months or even years. There's also something called limerence, a psychological state that many people mistake for love. Limerence is intense emotional fixation combined with intrusive thoughts, idealization, and a desperate desire for emotional reciprocation. In limerence, the person becomes mentally central. Your mood starts depending on their actions. A text can make your day feel incredible. Silence can ruin your entire mood. And the dangerous part is that limerence feels meaningful because it feels intense. But intensity and compatibility are not the same thing. Someone can trigger your nervous system powerfully while still being completely wrong for you. That realization changes how you see attraction. Because sometimes the people who feel most emotionally magnetic are activating old emotional wounds, not deep compatibility. And once you understand that, you begin separating emotional chemistry from emotional health. At this point, you might be wondering, if all of this is happening automatically in the brain, does that mean you have no control? Not exactly. Because awareness changes the pattern. The moment you start recognizing that what you're feeling is a combination of dopamine loops, attachment conditioning, rejection sensitivity, and imagination, something subtle shifts. You stop treating every thought like a command. You start seeing it as a mental event. A thought about them is not a signal you must act on. It's just a neural pattern firing based on reinforcement history. And that distinction matters more than it sounds. Because obsession thrives in unconsciousness. It weakens when it becomes conscious. There's also something important to understand about emotional pain in this cycle. A big part of obsession is not just desire, but withdrawal. When you don't get the emotional reward you were expecting, your brain reacts similarly to withdrawal from a habit. That's why it can feel restless, anxious, or even physically uncomfortable. You're not just missing a person. You're missing a chemical pattern your brain has adapted to. And that's why, just stop thinking about them never works. Because you're not dealing with a single thought. You're dealing with a reinforced loop that your brain has learned over time. So what actually breaks it? Not force. Not suppression. Not trying harder. What breaks it is interruption of the pattern combined with emotional reconditioning. When the reward stops being unpredictable, when the mental fantasy is no longer fed, and when your attention is consistently redirected elsewhere, the loop slowly weakens. But it doesn't disappear instantly. Because your brain resists losing something it once treated as important. And this is where many people misunderstand healing. Healing is not the moment you stop thinking about them completely. Healing is the moment their presence no longer controls your emotional state. You can remember them without collapsing emotionally. You can see their name without your nervous system reacting intensely. You stop interpreting every coincidence as a sign. Gradually, your brain stops assigning extraordinary meaning to ordinary stimuli. And slowly, the obsession loses emotional fuel. Here's another truth most people don't expect. When you finally detach from someone you were obsessed with, you often realize you barely knew them at all. You knew your emotional experience of them. You knew your hopes about them. You knew the fantasy version your mind created during loneliness, desire, uncertainty, and projection. But the real human being behind all that? Sometimes you barely explored who they actually were. That realization can feel shocking. Because obsession narrows perception. It makes one person appear emotionally larger than life. But once the emotional fog clears, your perspective changes. And suddenly you see things your brain ignored before. The inconsistency. The incompatibility. The emotional unavailability. The imbalance. Things that were always there. You just couldn't see them clearly while emotionally addicted to the possibility of being chosen. And maybe that's the deepest insight of all. Sometimes obsession is less about love, and more about the fear that without this person, something inside you will remain incomplete. But no person can permanently solve insecurity, loneliness, self-worth, or emotional emptiness for you. Those are internal experiences. And when another person becomes the center of your emotional stability, your mind naturally becomes afraid of losing them. That fear fuels obsession even more. But when your emotional foundation slowly becomes stronger inside yourself, something changes. You stop chasing emotional chaos and calling it passion. You stop confusing unpredictability with depth. You stop interpreting emotional anxiety as destiny. And for the first time, you begin seeing relationships not as emotional survival, but as connection. Calmer. Healthier. More real. Because the strongest relationships are usually not the ones that consume your mind every second. They're the ones where your mind finally feels safe enough to rest. If this helped you understand your mind better, subscribe for more videos like this.